Morning, everybody. Good morning. Got it. Okay. Welcome to the session this morning in the Food and Agriculture Pavilion. I'm really excited that you're all here in the second week of the COP. I'm sure some of you are already quite exhausted and overloaded with all the incredible information, knowledge, and insights that are being shared here. So I'm very happy to see you at this session called Bridging Local Evidence and Global Action, Biodiversity for Climate Resilience and Nutrition Secure Food Systems. I am Marielle Karstenberg. I am a partnership builder at the Netherlands Food Partnership. It's an organization in the Netherlands really there in place to link private sector, civil society, government, and research in partnerships. So we're facilitating the building of those partnerships to accelerate food system transformation in the low and middle income countries. I organized this session jointly with two other partners, the United Nations University and BAIF Research Development Organization, with really the aim of putting biodiversity much more front and central in all the conversations and negotiations that we have here, but also strategically linking those conversations with food systems, because there's a lot of synergy there between climate, food, and biodiversity. And that synergy that I heard yesterday, and I really like that quote, is natural, but the silos are man-made. And I think there's a huge need to break those silos and really move from thinking more about trade-offs to really looking at evidence and the practice and the opportunities that these nexuses offer in this incredible space. So our first conversation, and I have to mention, I'm missing 2 out of the 3 speakers at this moment to join. And I have to do many things at the same time. Hold up. This is me. What we're doing today, we have an opening panel to really kind of set the scene, look at the bigger context of why this is such a crucial topic to have in these spaces. But I think afterwards, it's much more important to also look at what's already happening in practice. It's not something that we're starting to engage with. There are a lot of different organizations already working very hard in their partnerships, in their activities to really facilitate those bridges and see it as an opportunity to strengthen their impacts and opportunities. For that, we'll be looking at the Netherlands Food Partnership, Biodiversity and Food Systems Partnership, where we created a bundle of 10 use cases that cross different sectors and scales that really show that impact, but also a case from India that already on the ground really shows how those linkages are facilitated. And then I would definitely like to get your input. So be prepared. At the end, I'll come to you. So for the first, Maya, looking at you, and hopefully the other speakers will come in too. I know that there are conversations with ministers and also Uber problems in the way, but hopefully they'll come quickly. Maya Rajeskaran, she's the Managing Director of the Americas region for the Alliance of Biodiversity and CGIAR. Please join. Maya, could you please introduce yourself a bit further? And I'm really eager to kind of with you explore the interface of science and policy around this important topic, as you're from the CGIAR, the world's biggest global network on research for land, water, and food system transformation. And what I've seen over the past couple of days here at COP and before is that the science and evidence around biodiversity, climate, and food is actually already there a lot. The risk of biodiversity loss is tangible. Let me quickly stop. Alvaro, thank you for being here. Our second speaker, yes, please go ahead. So let me quickly introduce while they're coming in and I'm coming back to you, Maya. Alvaro Rojas Pereira is an associate academic officer and climate risk analyst at the United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security. Thanks for joining us as well. So Maya, coming back to you in the science and policy interface. Like I mentioned, the data is quite there. We know the risk of biodiversity loss for food systems. We know the opportunity biodiversity offers for climate adaptation and climate risk. What I want to know from you, in your view, what are the key bottlenecks that prevent this evidence from translating into real change? And how can grounded examples from practice help to overcome that?
Okay, thank you, Maria. Great to be here. And thank you also for joining. And I know there's third day of the second week, and people are just slowly starting to coming in. So I represent the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CGIAR, a part of the CGIAR Center. And we work globally, and our mission is Science for Impact. So we do everything is based on very evidence-based, building the scientific data needed to really leverage finance, and also to kind of bring credible pilot that is potential for scaling. So there are multiple, and we are a global organization with offices in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and working in several countries, obviously with a significant number of partners in everything we do. So partnership is an absolutely key aspect of what we try to achieve and the way we do, and it's part of our DNA as kind of keep making sure that we enter into partnership both at local level, national, and international level, and also giving that credibility and ownership to and a co-creation and the results that come out of that. I think the first question, there are, during the last couple of days of COP, and there was a little significant conversations and many discussions came up, like there are multiple barriers. I mean, obviously the policy coherence is still something that governments are getting handled at it. It's not an easy task, and bringing, climate, biodiversity, and nutrition often sits in different ministries. And when you combine that with finance ministries and making countries to meet their target, it's a difficult task. But I think what I see as a positive trend is actually everybody's trying to move in that direction and getting through that, walking that difficult path slowly and with the variable degrees of progress. The second bottleneck is also lots of pilots, but it doesn't mean that all pilots are up for scaling. So there are good projects and programs that have demonstrated results, but scaling is a very different task. And scaling also needs a lot of enabling environment for us to take, and also some sort of investment, particularly investment at the country level for scaling to happen. So those are kind of the two major things. And there's also knowledge gaps. And when you talk about integrating these things, integration always comes with trade-offs. And very often we need to quite understand what is the trade-off from the climate side, on the nutrition side, or on the biodiversity side of things. So that trade-off and what kind of trade-offs we are willing to take. And that's another decision point that stakeholders in any projects need to take. Win-win is possible, but not always win-win is kind of a difficult one. But we have to kind of understand the trade-offs and local ownership. And I think we could all do much better when you talk about biodiversity, and a lot of the biodiversities and indigenous communities and local ownership. And I think we are more and more need to be speaking, bringing those people into conversation, building capacity on both ends, not just building the capacity of people on the ground, but also understanding their systems, why they make the certain decision, how they make decision, what kind of different system they have in place. So building the capacity on both ends is still an opportunity that we all need to take up. I mean, we, as all of us sitting here, also need to understand their systems better as they try to work with us in terms of, I'm speaking very specifically about indigenous communities and some of the opportunities and challenges that goes with that. So there are multiple, barriers to it, but we are on a path, and I'm seeing that we are more and more walking that difficult path to come together. And I can think of many different examples from a research perspective. For example, our old strategy for research for impact is built on the nexus between nutrition, biodiversity, and climate, and broadly the environmental aspect. And finding that, the nice middle is again, not an easy task, but more and more we are trying to see how new projects and programs really absolutely take into account this nexus approach and do our best to build those kind of nexus and co-create benefits accordingly. So I can think about many examples. Perhaps I can come in later.
Thank you, Maya. And Alvaro, also kind of building on what Maya was saying about indigenous peoples and farmers and the importance to be locally led. You work with climate risk analysis that bring in ecosystem and local perspectives. How can we actually meaningfully engage farmers and food production producers in these analyses, and how can they actually themselves also benefit from that work?
Thank you, Maria. Apologies for being late. I was listening very attentive to the colleague here, Maya, because I think a lot of the barriers and the hurdles that you guys are facing are similar to the ones we are facing as well at UNU. I'm also familiar with the work you have done in Africa. You have this wonderful platform as well, where there's a lot of available data, a lot of available studies, but often they are not in your particular case, but in general, these are often written for other people with certain levels of expertise and certain ways to know or understand these types of risks. And I think communication is a key element in the way we do things. At UNU, something that we often try to do is work with open source tools, right? So we look for tools, analytics tools that everybody in principle could access to and could manage themselves. But how open is open access? It's a very important question. So even if the tool is for free, even if it's completely updated and you can still use it and it's workable, you need to have some technical skills, some modeling skills that often lack, not only for farmers, but for different groups. So we try to do is to engage them as meaningfully as possible as we can since the beginning. So we are able to communicate them. This is what the study will bring at the end. This is how you can help us shape what is the scope of it. And this is some of the data and assumptions that we're going to make throughout the road. So please help us understand, are these adaptation measures working for you? So often we hear about nature-based solutions, for example. Nature-based solutions are wonderful and they are very cost-effective, but they don't work as well in every context. And in some cases, for example, they're work-intensive. And something we're seeing is that in many places, the workforce in the agricultural sector is aging. The young people are going somewhere else. So their ability not only to implement, but also to maintain some of these nature-based solutions, it's not as easy, right? So that becomes a new hurdle that it's important. There are also gender biases there in how somebody who has to take other tasks at home has to also take care of these nature-based solutions, which by definition are also, they also need some time. They're not better or worse in that sense. So understanding a little bit their perspective, not just from one specific point, but more, it's important for us. We also try to, on the way, make it as the conversation as open as possible. There are certain things that, in my experience in the scientific field, we take for granted. What is a hazard, for example? What is a drought? What is a heat wave, for example? This is terminology that for us is maybe evident, but when you have the conversation with a colleague, they don't necessarily know or are not necessarily familiar with those details. So for us, I think, and very much in line of what Maya is saying, it is about the relationships that you build with the colleagues or with the producers. They're experts themselves. It's about the language that you build in order to communicate with them. And ultimately, well, what we try to do is to bring them the best available technology, also accepting that a lot of what we're going to be delivering, maybe they're going to be benefited by through somebody else, but we want them to be aware that this is coming, aware that this information is out there. We have a concrete project, for example, right now in Latin America, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Mexico. And in this project, for example, we're making booklets in which we communicate with different stakeholders and we tell them, we know, does this sound familiar? This is a story of a farmer or some sort. Is this something that you relate to? And how one of these solutions look like to you and what are your challenges? So I'll leave it there, but I think it's very key, a lot of the inputs that the colleague was expressing before. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvaro. And welcome, Paul. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure you rushed in quite a bit, so I'm very appreciative that you could make the time. We talked a bit about the science policy interface, but also how to link with farmers and food producers within risk analysis around climate change. But you are a policymaker. So I'm definitely looking for you for a policy perspective. And also building on your experiences both here in Brazil, because you were an agricultural counselor for the Netherlands in Brazil, but now the head of the climate team at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm quite curious to learn from you. Why do you see the need to include biodiversity much more fundamental within the climate policy spaces, but also very much strategically linking it with food system transformation?
Thank you. And sorry that I was late. I keep getting lost. Do you have the same problem?
Yes.
But yeah, I feel very privileged that I can speak here because it's the CGIAR, which I'm a big fan of from my time that I was working on food security with the Netherlands Food Partnership, of course, and being in Brazil and talking about climate. So thanks a lot. I think like from the in Brazil, I learned like so that agriculture and biodiversity are hugely interconnected. I think like the biggest part of the forest in Brazil are actually on private land. So it's very dependent on how the farmers like deal with the forest that they have, the legal reserve, whether it is maintained, which is a risky thing. There's also huge areas of national conservation that the government is responsible for with a very complicated system of control. But that interconnection is very much there in Brazil. So they also always say like the agriculture is the problem and the solution. So the pressure on the areas that are under threat is coming for a large part from agriculture, but also the solution is also coming from agriculture to try and make that combination properly. Because like think somebody from the World Bank did a calculation once that they say like, well, if Brazil spends the same amount of money on preservation, its national reserves as Europe does, it will spend more than its national income. So it's just impossible to sort of put a fence around everything and exclude the private sector. So that's one thing. Now, as a policymaker working on climate, we also have the biodiversity program within our team, and we had a discussion a while back, and sort of they were sort of characterized as sort of the little village that Asterix and Obelix, like the Romans, were trying to conquer. So they're trying to sort of hold on to that agenda, and I think it's hard at the moment where there's already a lot of pressure on international cooperation and then climate is still properly on the agenda, but biodiversity is losing it, which is like, and I have that picture of the waves, right? So the COVID and the climate and the biodiversity collapse. And that, I mean, it's very, very risky what we're doing now. So I think my solution is like that we like to not keep it as separate tracks also in the way that we design our program. So that not to say that, okay, we have climate and then we have biodiversity and then maybe somewhere they'll meet and then we'll have a talk like this and then we'll say it's all connected, but to really try and design programs with that connection in mind. So not do it at the end, but do it at the start. So we're also now looking at whether we can design an instrument for private finance mobilization that has that interconnection in it from the start. And I think that is what we're going to work on more. So not say, okay, biodiversity, and we'll go to the CBD and we'll have projects there, but we'll go to the CBD with a similar set of programs that we would also present here, but then with a strong connection to climate. And I think, and that's my last thing. You're looking at me like, just stop talking. On the agriculture side, because that's a lot can be found in the interconnection to climate smart agriculture. Of course, biodiversity is key for agriculture to survive. But it's also, I think, a good way to incorporate biodiversity in the programming that we do for climate smart agriculture, and then say, okay, what needs to be done to include biodiversity? And I hope that for policymakers, we get to, by doing that programming, we get to a stage, and I think that's also why we appreciate the work that you've done with the examples of biodiversity and agriculture, that we get to a stage where we have a good feeling that we're talking about the same thing. Because biodiversity, like somebody's talking about rhinos, and other people are talking about genetic material, other people are talking about soil. So to really find out, okay, where is it, and what is a key thing to invest in on that nexus where the three things meet. So thank you for the examples that you've made, and I'll tell you in a year's time where we are in our programming.
Thanks, Paul. And I know that that's not easy to do. The Dutch government has committed to mainstreaming biodiversity within their foreign trade and development cooperation policies, but it comes with huge trade-offs as well as synergies that we can tap into. But those conversations are really crucial and important to ensure that we work in synergy rather than against each other. I want to thank this panel. You can take a seat again and move to the first case in practice that shows the examples on the ground. And I still need to get something that I forgot. But at the Netherlands Food Partnership, we host a community of practice of now 160 members from over 150 organizations across the world, including private sector, farmers, farmer organizations, finance partners, government, civil society, all coming together, really eager to learn about how to strengthen that nexus between biodiversity and food system, but also incorporate that better within their own work and learn from other experiences, as well as contribute to that general mind shift that we need to take place with the policymakers, with the finance partners, with everybody around the table, to really make this front and central in our efforts. So with those partners over the last year, we've worked together to find 10 concrete use cases, examples from practice from the partners, where that linkages really is incorporated in their work already. It's not meant that these 10 are sharing the whole story. There are definitely blind spots there. There are use cases that I've missed out on that should be included in this bundle. And they're not showing an exact right approach, but it's really sharing the pathway, the journey of learning about these examples and how that can also inspire further action. I have the bundle available. I only have 4 copies left, but I'm happy to share them with everybody who wants one here. But on your chair, there's also a hyperlink on the small leaflet that includes the full one. We presented the use cases in 4-pagers and in 1-pagers. So if you feel a bit crunched in time, pick the ones you like and read a little or read it all. There's also a cross-cutting insights chapter, and that really shares what can we collectively learn from these use cases. I won't go too much into depth on that part in this session particularly, because I want to highlight specific use cases that are represented here. And included is a glossary of key terminology. And that's something that I think is very useful, because often we think we all speak the same language, also in food systems, in climate, in biodiversity. But what I've learned coming from a food systems perspective and stepping into those other spaces is the steep learning curve and terminology that is used. So we tried to help the reader also by sharing some of those key terminologies. We have 3 of the use case as representatives here with us today. So I want to invite them to the stage to share a bit about their use case. We don't have too much time, but I am very excited to spotlight them. First, Juan Pablo Fuiquez is the Global Climate Lead at SNV. Ximena Barrera Ray, she's the Director of Government Relations and International Affairs at WWF Colombia, and Victoria Crawford, Director of Agriculture and Food at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Thank you all for being here. Juan Pablo, I'm starting with you. SNV has worked with us on a use case on rangelands in Kenya and how they incorporate water, climate, food, resilience with the local communities around and other partners around that system. I want to know from you, what makes locally led biodiversity action effective for building resilient food systems under climate pressure?
Thanks, Mariel, and thanks also for having me. One caveat, I'm with SNV since June, so I may not know every detail, but what I do know is that one of our projects in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, it's called CRAFT, is actually supported by the Dutch. Is working? Yeah, sorry for that. So let me rephrase. So I was saying that thank you all for, thank you, the Netherlands Food Partnership, for inviting us. One caveat, I'm with SMV since June, so I may not know all the details of it, but what I do know is that one of our projects in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania is called CRAFT. It's funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we are implemented together with AgriTerra and Wageningen University. It's looking at those opportunities of nexuses between food and biodiversity. Like, for instance, local communities that know what are the type of seeds that are more suitable for the soil, what are the type of practices, climate smart practices that can restore ecosystem functions, what are the areas where there's springs of water emerging, what are the areas that are worth preserving, what are these wildlife and food conflicts resolution happening, and that knowledge is embedded in the local communities. They are the ones that really know the context, the particularities of the landscape, and then what we come in is with finance instruments to just accelerate that knowledge from the communities. So CRAFT is a good example of that, and that's what we have been sharing and the bundle as use case.
Thanks so much. And maybe, if I can, diving a bit deeper, what surprised you the most when working on that interface between biodiversity, climate, food system in that case?
Well, the challenge is that when you start working in an area that has been very depleted over time, so it's very difficult to change the mindset, because we know already what has happened in past decades, and those are the practices that have led me to the moment where I'm today. To give you an example, this is not an SMB project, but it's another project I was working a couple of years ago in Zambia. I was visiting a lot of rangelands in the Miombo area, and they have land, they have cattle, they have resources, but they didn't have water. Why? Because for centuries, people was told to just burn the soil because then the soil would regenerate. But by doing that, in that type of soil, you're actually creating a mold. So when it rains, the water goes to the Zambezi and doesn't infiltrate. So you see that this rancher in Zambia have resources, have land, but they don't have the ecosystem is not working properly. So that's where the nexus between food and biodiversity is important, to conserve those areas, to restore those ecosystem functions, and to make these cases like the rancher in Zambia profitable. And that's what is shocking sometimes. No? It's interesting because we have been talking for decades about the connections between environmental services and the recognition of agroforestry systems, and then how agroforestry systems provide ecosystem functions, ecosystem services. The market is still not recognizing sometimes. So those are the critical points, how the market can create incentives for this type of interventions to scale up more and more.
Thank you. Ximena, coming to you next. You are representing the use case from WWF Colombia. And that's exciting because they've really worked hard to bring food systems into the MBSEP there. And I think it's a great example for how also within these policy instruments, we can really find those bridges and include these different nexus elements. Ximena, how can locally biodiversity initiatives help shape policies that link food systems, nature, and climate change?
Thank you, Maria. Can you hear me? Yes. No, thank you very much. It's a really important space to showcase the work that we have done in Colombia. As you know, last year, Colombia was hosting the COP16, so it was an incredible opportunity. And you have seen this at this conference also, the leadership on the synergies agenda. No? So that's very important just to mention. Basically, what we have done in Colombia in collaboration with CGIAR and with the other institutions, we identified the opportunity to influence the MBSAP process. So we were connecting many of the work that we have done regarding the food systems approach. Basically, what we have done, and we engaged with the Ministry of Environment on this issue, they developed a very inclusive process, like a whole society approach for the MBSAP updated process. They carry out around 116 participants workshop in 23 regions of Colombia, where local communities, indigenous people, and Afro-descendants participate very actively in the process. It's really important in terms of the synergy agenda to recognize the importance of indigenous people, Afro-descendants, but also local communities in the approach of the work on the territories, but also their own vision of the territories, where they see clearly the interconnection with biodiversity and the climate agenda, but they also understand the challenges, but also they provide the solutions in terms of the work that they are doing in this approach. Just to mention that as the way of Colombia, we have worked with the indigenous people and local communities and Afro-descendants in many of the territories, where we have identified, for instance, in cocoa productions, in different systems, but also in chagras, indigenous territories, what will kind of the main elements that needs to be reflected as part of the NBSAP process. And basically, when you see the Colombian NBSAP, you can see that it's very ambitious. It has been very well recognized internationally in many of spaces. It strengthens, for instance, the importance of a landscape approach and territorial governance as one of the key issues, but also important to protect and restore ecological systems. Also important to mention the work with the private sector. So also Andy with the National Enterprise Association carried a roadmap for the NBSAP process, where companies were working on the nature positive agenda and also on the agroecological systems. It's also important to emphasize the role of financial institutions, for instance, on the issue about access, finance, and markets. Also, financial institutions were working a lot on the TNFD approach, but also providing solutions and